The sun of early morning highlights the atomic cloud as it drifts away from any we took. But the strange and mysterious ingredients in this cloud will not be lost.
The world's most powerful weapon wasn't discovered. It was chased, hoarded, copied, stolen. This power, so longed for, so tightly guarded, promised absolute dominance. But it came with a cost. The worst destruction humanity has ever known. This is the hidden story of how 10 countries joined the world's most dangerous club, and the others that came close. Welcome to the Nuclear Club. It started not with an explosion, but a question. In a Berlin lab in late 1938, 2 German physicists, Otto Hahn and Fritz Strassmann, were firing neutrons at uranium. What they observed shocked them. The uranium nucleus didn't just shift, it split. And in that split, it released energy far beyond anything chemical reactions had ever produced. It was nuclear fission, a chain reaction that, if controlled, could power cities. But if unleashed all at once, it could destroy them. News of the discovery spread quickly through the global scientific community. And one man, far from Germany, understood the consequences immediately. Albert Einstein, then living in the United States, was urged by fellow physicist Leo Szilard to write a letter to President Franklin D. Roosevelt. In it, they warned, Germany might try to weaponize this discovery. If they succeeded first, the consequences could be catastrophic. The letter landed on Roosevelt's desk in October 1939. By then, Hitler had already invaded Poland, and the race had begun. The first member of the Nuclear Club was the United States. It began with a warning from Einstein, but it ended with the most powerful weapon ever built. The United States didn't just want to beat Germany to the bomb, they wanted to control the future. And in 1942, that vision became real with a code name, the Manhattan Project. Spanning secret sites from Los Alamos to Oak Ridge, it wasn't just an experiment, it was an industrial effort on the scale of a nation. Scientists, soldiers, engineers, over 130,000 people worked in silence, often unaware of the full scope of what they were building. And what they were building was terrifying. The US government spent nearly 1% of its entire GDP, more than it spent on the entire automobile industry, to split atoms and harness their fury. Physicists like J. Robert Oppenheimer, Enrico Fermi, and Niels Bohr became reluctant architects of a new kind of war. Then, in July 1945, at a desert site in New Mexico, known only to a few, the first successful nuclear test lit the sky. It was called Trinity. The explosion turned sand to glass. The shockwave shattered windows 100 miles away. And in that moment, humanity crossed a line it could never uncross. While President Truman met Stalin and Churchill at the Potsdam Conference, a message arrived. The test worked. Truman told Stalin that the US had developed a new weapon of unusual destructive force, a moment of supposed triumph for Truman, but a secret already compromised. He didn't mention the name, the scale, or the fact that Stalin already knew, thanks to Soviet spies inside the Manhattan Project. 3 weeks later, the world saw the weapon for the first time. On August 6th and 9th, 1945, the United States dropped Little Boy and Fat Man on the Japanese cities of Hiroshima and Nagasaki. Over 100,000 people died instantly. Thousands more followed. Japan surrendered. World War II was over. But the nuclear age had just begun. The next member of the Nuclear Club was the Soviet Union. They weren't first, but they didn't plan to be last. the Soviet Union watched the American nuclear breakthrough with a mix of dread and determination. By the time the bombs fell on Japan, Stalin already had his own atomic project in motion. But what most didn't know, he also had spies inside the Manhattan Project. Klaus Fuchs, a brilliant physicist whose scientific insights proved as valuable as any stolen blueprint. Theodore Hall, David Greenglass, names barely known to the public, but crucial links in a chain of secrets that flowed from Los Alamos to Moscow. Through this shadow network, the USSR obtained blueprints, formulas, even detailed notes from the Trinity test, but there was a problem. They didn't trust it. Soviet scientists feared misinformation, traps, and sabotage. So while they used stolen intelligence, they also did the math themselves. Stalin, famously declaring, "There can be only one master," was driven by an almost manic fear of American nuclear supremacy. With help from captured German scientists and a relentless work ethic, fueled by Cold War paranoia, they built their own bomb. In 1949, just 4 years after Hiroshima, the Soviets stunned the world with RDS-1, their first successful nuclear test in the Kazakh desert. The American monopoly on nuclear weapons was over. The US scrambled, politicians panicked, the arms race was now official, and it wasn't about who had a bomb, it was about who had more. The Cold War went from political to apocalyptic overnight, and the game wasn't limited to 2 players. The next member of the nuclear club was the United Kingdom. They were allies in war, until the secrets got too big to share. Before the Manhattan Project even had a name, Britain was already working on nuclear weapons. Their effort, called Tube Alloys, began in 1940, pioneering the very science of the atom bomb. But with Nazi bombs falling on London and resources stretched thin, Britain made a fateful choice. They gave everything to America. Under the Quebec Agreement, Britain merged tube alloys into the Manhattan Project. In return, the US promised to share the tech once the war ended, and to never use the bomb against each other. But when the war was over, so was the trust. President Truman, backed by American lawmakers, cut Britain out completely. The US Congress, with the passage of the McMahon Act, legally slammed the door shut on their wartime allies. The agreement ignored, the research classified, the so-called special relationship suddenly one-sided. So Britain went back to work, angry, determined, and years behind. They didn't stay behind for long. Thanks to their head start, access to uranium from Commonwealth territories, and experience from the war, the UK detonated its first nuclear device in 1952, Operation Hurricane, off the coast of Australia. It was a bomb built out of pride as much as science. But even as Britain joined the nuclear club, another evolution was already underway, because scientists weren't just splitting atoms anymore. They were fusing them, and the results would be far more terrifying. Splitting the atom changed warfare, but fusing them, that changed everything. By the early 1950s, it wasn't enough to have a nuclear bomb. The US wanted something bigger, much bigger. Enter the thermonuclear bomb, also known as the hydrogen bomb. A weapon not powered by fission alone, but by fusion, the same reaction that powers the sun. It was so powerful, it didn't just destroy cities, it could erase them. If the Hiroshima bomb could destroy a city, Ivy Mike could erase a region. The first successful test was Ivy Mike, detonated by the United States in 1952 on a Pacific island. It was over 450 times more powerful than the bomb dropped on Nagasaki. The mushroom cloud stretched miles into the sky. The island it was tested on, gone. J. Robert Oppenheimer, the father of the original bomb, opposed this next step. He warned it would open a new chapter in destruction, one humanity might not survive. But the US pressed forward, and where America led, Others followed. In 1955, the Soviet Union detonated RDS-37, their own thermonuclear bomb, confirming the terrifying new balance of power. By 1957, the United Kingdom joined in with Operation Grapple, proving they too could wield fusion fire. From now on, having a bomb wasn't enough. You needed the bomb, the most advanced, most destructive, most fearsome weapon humans had ever created. But while the major powers flexed their nuclear muscles, one country, wounded by a geopolitical crisis, quietly began its own nuclear journey. And it didn't want help. It wanted independence. The next member of the nuclear club was France. After World War II, France found itself in a strange position. It was a victorious ally, but not exactly treated like one. The US had refused to share nuclear technology, despite France's role in the war. Britain had been cut off too, but France wasn't even invited to the table. That stung. So after the embarrassment of the Suez Crisis in 1956, where France, the UK, and Israel were forced to back down under pressure from the US and USSR, President Charles de Gaulle made a decision. France would never be humiliated again. It would build its own nuclear bomb. For France, still grappling with the decline of its colonial empire and seeking to reassert its place among global powers, the bomb was a necessary declaration. With uranium from colonies like Niger, Gabon, and Madagascar, and scientists who had contributed to the Manhattan Project, France had the raw materials and the motivation. In 1960, it joined the nuclear club with a test in the Algerian desert called Gerboise Bleue. But it didn't stop there. France pushed ahead independently, ignoring pressure from NATO and even its allies. By 1968, it had tested a hydrogen bomb, making it the world's fourth thermonuclear power. France's eventual withdrawal from NATO's integrated military command in 1966 was a direct consequence of this independent policy. De Gaulle called it France's force de frappe, its strike force. It wasn't about war. It was about sovereignty. To France, the bomb wasn't just a weapon. It was a guarantee of dignity, a declaration that no foreign superpower would ever again dictate French policy. The next member of the nuclear club was China. In the 1950s, China wasn't yet a global superpower, but it wanted to be. And Chairman Mao Zedong believed one thing would get them there faster than anything else: the bomb. At first, China had help. The Soviet Union, hoping to strengthen the communist bloc, agreed to assist Mao's nuclear ambitions. Chinese scientists were trained in Soviet labs, and blueprints were shared, until the friendship cracked. When Khrushchev began backing away from direct confrontation with the West, Mao saw it as weakness. By 1959, the alliance was over. Soviet advisors left China, and China was on its own. But Mao didn't stop. Even as millions starved during the catastrophic Great Leap Forward, Chairman Mao poured every possible resource into the bomb, seeing it as China's ultimate ticket to global respect and survival. In 1964, it happened. Project 596, a codename chosen to mock the year the Soviets abandoned them, was a success. China became the fifth nuclear power, and then, in a show of sheer determination, they did something that stunned the world. In just 32 months, they went from fission to fusion, testing their first hydrogen bomb in 1967. No country had ever moved that fast, from a starving nation in chaos to a nuclear giant in just a few years. China had done what many thought impossible. The next member of the nuclear club was Israel. No announcement, no televised detonation, no official numbers, just rumors, whispers, satellite photos, and one man with a camera. Israel has never publicly admitted to having nuclear weapons. But behind that silence is a shadow story of deals, deception, and one of the most tightly controlled secrets in modern history. It began in the 1950s with France, in exchange for strategic partnership, partially shaped by the Suez Crisis. France helped Israel build a nuclear facility in the Negev desert, officially for energy research. Unofficially, it was much more. By the early 1960s, US President John F. Kennedy grew suspicious. He pushed for inspections, demanded transparency, but Israel stonewalled, offering staged tours while hiding entire underground chambers. Kennedy kept pressing. Then, he was assassinated. His successor, Lyndon B. Johnson, was far less aggressive on the issue. The pressure faded, and the Israeli program advanced. Fast forward to 1986. A whistleblower named Mordecai Vanunu, a former technician at the Negev facility, fled the country. He leaked photos and documents to a British newspaper, exposing what many already suspected. Israel had not only built nuclear weapons, they had built a lot of them. But the story didn't end there. Vanunu was lured to Rome by a Mossad agent, posing as a romantic interest. He was drugged, kidnapped, flown back to Israel, tried in secret, and imprisoned for 18 years. Today, Israel still hasn't confirmed its nuclear arsenal, but estimates suggest it holds up to 90 nuclear warheads, including thermonuclear devices. It's a doctrine of deliberate ambiguity. We don't have them, but if we did, we'd use them if we must. This policy, known as nuclear ambiguity, remains in place today, neither confirming nor denying, but ensuring any potential enemy understands the implicit threat. The result? A nuclear power that doesn't officially exist, yet quietly shapes global diplomacy, especially in the Middle East. The next member of the nuclear club was India. It was called Smiling Buddha, but what it unleashed was anything but peaceful. India's path to becoming a nuclear power was slow, secretive, and many argue, sabotaged. Research began in the 1940s under physicist Homi Bhabha, often referred to as the father of India's nuclear program. But just as momentum built, tragedy struck. In 1966, Bhabha died in a plane crash over the Alps. Officially, it was an accident. Unofficially, rumors swirled, suggesting the CIA may have had a hand in it to delay India's progress, and delay it did. India continued developing nuclear capabilities under intense scrutiny from the West. The CIA monitored their test sites via satellite, forcing Indian scientists to operate with precision timing, working in short windows when they knew the skies were clear. Then came 1974. In the desert of Rajasthan, India conducted its first nuclear test. They called it a peaceful nuclear explosion. The name? Smiling Buddha. The world didn't smile back. Condemnation and sanctions poured in, especially from countries like Canada, who had provided nuclear reactors for energy, not weapons development. India, seeing the NPT as a discriminatory pact designed to keep the powerful, refused to sign, demanding equal footing or nothing. For decades, India kept its arsenal theoretical, capable, but not fully weaponized. It wasn't until the 1990s, after decades of geopolitical tension with Pakistan and China, that India developed and tested its full nuclear arsenal. But here's what still puzzles many. Why was India's entry into the nuclear club met with more outrage than others, especially when countries like Israel or South Africa raised far fewer alarms? Maybe it was timing, maybe it was politics, or maybe India's bomb and its name said more than the world wanted to hear, because behind that peaceful smile was a message loud and clear. India would no longer be left behind. The next member of the nuclear club was South Africa. It's the rarest story in nuclear history. While most nations fought, stole, and sacrificed to get the bomb, South Africa built 6 of them and then gave them all up. How and why? Let's rewind. South Africa had something every nuclear program needs: uranium, lots of it. By the 1960s, it was one of the world's largest uranium producers, supplying the US, UK, France, and allegedly the Soviets and Israelis as well. Officially, South Africa's program was for peaceful nuclear energy. Unofficially, it began developing weapons by the 1970s, driven by Cold War fears and its growing international isolation under apartheid. Facing threats from Soviet-backed movements in neighboring Angola and Namibia, and without strong allies, South Africa believed that only a nuclear deterrent would ensure survival. But they weren't working alone. Swiss firms like Sulzer AG provided parts and research for uranium enrichment, and many suspect Israel played a key role, possibly exchanging designs or expertise for South Africa's uranium. In 1977, South Africa nearly conducted a nuclear test in the Kalahari Desert, only for a Soviet satellite to spot the preparations. Global pressure forced them to abort. But in 1979, US satellites detected a mysterious double flash in the Indian Ocean near the Prince Edward Islands, a signal consistent with a nuclear detonation. The official story, unconfirmed. The likely truth, a joint South Africa-Israel test, done in secret, far from global eyes. By the mid-1980s, South Africa had built 6 nuclear bombs, roughly equivalent in power to Hiroshima's. But the world was changing. The Soviet Union was collapsing. Apartheid was ending. And South Africa's white minority government feared handing over nuclear weapons to a new leadership. So in a stunning move, South Africa voluntarily dismantled its entire nuclear arsenal. This was an unprecedented act, and the only time a nation has willingly disarmed itself of a fully operational nuclear arsenal. A testament to a changing world order and a unique domestic transition. They destroyed the bombs, shut down the enrichment programs, and in 1991, they became the first and only country in history to build nukes and give them up by choice. Later, they revealed it all to the International Atomic Energy Agency, IAEA. The enriched uranium was sealed in vaults. But the story doesn't end there. In 2007, armed intruders breached one of those nuclear vaults. They were stopped, but not before getting dangerously close. To this day, South Africa's story is a paradox. A nation that built the world's deadliest weapon, only to walk away from it. The next member of the nuclear club was Pakistan. In 1974, India tested its first nuclear device, Smiling Buddha. It was a signal to the world, and to Pakistan, it was a threat. Just 3 years earlier, Pakistan had lost a war with India. The result? East Pakistan became Bangladesh. It was a national humiliation. That's when Prime Minister Zulfikar Ali Bhutto made a bold vow. If India builds the bomb, we will eat grass, even go hungry, but we will get one of our own. What followed was one of the most dramatic and secretive nuclear pursuits in history. It started with a man named Abdul Qadir Khan, a Pakistani metallurgist working at a Dutch nuclear facility. There, Khan stole blueprints for uranium enrichment technology, smuggled them back to Pakistan, and launched the country's covert weapons program. Pakistan had help, especially from China, who saw India as a mutual rival. China provided blueprints, materials, and expertise to speed up the Pakistani program. Meanwhile, the US turned a blind eye. Despite clear signs that Pakistan was developing weapons, America continued to send aid, because Pakistan was a key ally against the Soviet invasion of Afghanistan. By the late 1990s, tensions with India reached a boiling point. In 1998, India conducted a second series of nuclear tests, this time including a thermonuclear device. Pakistan responded just weeks later. They detonated 5 nuclear bombs in the Raskot Hills, completing their first successful tests. Now, the world had another nuclear power. But what makes Pakistan especially dangerous is this: India maintains a no first use policy, nukes only in retaliation. Pakistan, first use. They reserve the right to strike first if they feel threatened, even by conventional attacks. An Indian military official later said, Pakistan's nuclear policy has deterred India from striking, even when provoked. And there's one more twist. The same man who helped Pakistan build the bomb, A.Q. Khan, also helped others. In 2004, he confessed to running a global black market network, selling nuclear secrets to North Korea, Iran, and Libya. His actions triggered worldwide panic about the uncontrolled spread of nuclear technology. Khan's Black Market, a real-life spy thriller, exposed the terrifying vulnerability of nuclear technology falling into the wrong hands. The next member of the nuclear club was North Korea. North Korea didn't just want nuclear weapons. It believed it needed them for survival. After the Korean War ended in 1953, the regime of Kim Il-sung saw nuclear weapons as the only way to keep enemies, especially the US and South Korea, at bay. At first, North Korea got help from the Soviet Union, which built its first nuclear research facility in the 1960s. Then came limited support from China, and later, a critical boost from Pakistan's A.Q. Khan, who provided essential uranium enrichment technology. In public, North Korea signed the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty in 1985. But behind the scenes, it was already enriching uranium and delaying international inspections. By the early 2000s, tensions hit a breaking point. The US accused North Korea of violating the treaty. North Korea retaliated by withdrawing from the treaty entirely in 2003. 3 years later, in 2006, they conducted their first nuclear test. It was small, possibly a dud, but the message was loud. We have the bomb. They kept testing, refining, improving. 2009, a second, more successful test. 2013, a third detonation confirming steady progress. 2016 and 2017. North Korea claimed to have tested thermonuclear weapons, dramatically raising global alarms. Today, North Korea's weapons are shrouded in secrecy. But one thing is clear, they exist. The regime uses them not just as a shield, but as a tool for diplomacy, threats, and survival. From energy research to rogue arsenal, North Korea had officially entered the nuclear club, becoming its most unpredictable member. North Korea's nuclear program is not just about deterrence. It's a direct challenge to global stability, wielded by a regime often seen as the world's most unpredictable. Not every country built the bomb, but many held them, sometimes just miles from city centers. During the Cold War, the United States quietly stationed nuclear weapons in dozens of allied nations as part of its global deterrence strategy. Belgium, Germany, Italy, the Netherlands, Turkey, even Greece, Japan, South Korea, Morocco and Canada saw deployments. Sometimes these were actual warheads. Other times, the US simply positioned delivery systems, planes, missiles, and submarines capable of carrying nukes. At its peak, America stored over 7,000 nuclear weapons abroad. Why? So if the Soviets struck first, NATO could respond instantly, without waiting to launch from US soil. The Soviet Union did the same. Nuclear stockpiles were distributed across its republics: Ukraine, Belarus, Kazakhstan, Georgia, Armenia, Estonia, Lithuania, and more. Even Cuba, during the infamous Cuban Missile Crisis, became a flashpoint for Cold War annihilation. The Cuban Missile Crisis brought the world to the brink of nuclear war, a stark reminder of the ever-present danger of these distributed arsenals. But when the USSR collapsed, something remarkable happened. Ukraine, Belarus, and Kazakhstan gave up their nuclear weapons. The US helped dismantle many of them through the Nunluga Cooperative Threat Reduction Program. Today, the practice continues in subtler forms. The US still maintains tactical nukes in Europe and Turkey. And the most terrifying storage? Submarines. Nuclear-armed submarines roam the oceans, silent, untraceable, and ready to strike. Even if a country's land-based nukes were destroyed, its subs could still retaliate. It's called second strike capability, and it's one of the main reasons the world hasn't seen nuclear war since 1945. Not every nuclear story ends in a mushroom cloud. Some nations got close, very close, but never crossed the line. And their reasons? Politics, pressure, sabotage, diplomacy. Argentina and Brazil once teetered on the edge of a nuclear arms race. But instead of detonating bombs, they signed a peace pact. Their rivalry was redirected to football, where for once the stakes weren't extinction. Sweden had the capability, the scientists, and the designs. They shelved the program, choosing international trust over silent arsenals. Then there were the countries who tried, but were stopped. Iraq, Iran, Libya, and Syria all built facilities, hired scientists, and enriched uranium. But nearly every attempt met the same end: bombed by Israel, sabotaged by cyber attacks, or buried under diplomatic pressure. Their stories are riddled with black ops, political spin, and a race against detection. Japan stands as one of the most capable nations never to build a bomb. With cutting-edge nuclear energy infrastructure and vast stockpiles of enriched uranium, they could produce weapons rapidly, if they chose to. This capability acts as a potent, latent deterrence. But after suffering the horrors of Hiroshima and Nagasaki, Japan holds to a pacifist stance. Still, some speculate that a functional arsenal could be assembled in mere weeks, should that policy ever shift. Taiwan came close until US pressure shut the program down. Romania, under Ceausescu, explored enrichment, but never progressed. Yugoslavia tried twice before collapsing as a state, and Iran remains the most scrutinized nation on Earth when it comes to nuclear ambitions. Their facilities, intentions, and capabilities are the subject of constant global debate. Depending on who you ask, they're either restrained by diplomacy or perpetually weeks away from becoming the next nuclear state. In many of these cases, it wasn't a lack of technology. It was politics, espionage, or calculated diplomacy that kept them out of the club. While some nations chased the bomb, others chose to outlaw it entirely. In the wake of Cold War escalation, regions around the globe began to push back, not with weapons, but with treaties. Their message was clear: not here, not ever. In Latin America, the Treaty of Tlatelolco was a groundbreaking move. Proposed by Mexico, it created the world's first nuclear weapon-free zone, covering an entire populated continent. Argentina and Brazil, both once close to building bombs, signed on. So did nearly every nation in the region, except for French Guiana, still a territory of nuclear-armed France. Technically, French Guiana remains under the treaty's scope, though no weapons are stored there. Inspired by this bold step, more treaties followed. The Rarotonga Treaty banned nuclear weapons across the South Pacific. The Pelindaba Treaty established Africa as a nuclear-free continent. The Bangkok Treaty created a ban across Southeast Asia. The Semipalatinsk Treaty did the same for Central Asia. And the Antarctic Treaty went further still, prohibiting all military activity on Earth's most remote continent, including nuclear testing. These zones weren't just symbolic. They were statements of unity and principle, made by countries often caught in the crosshairs of global powers. And despite lacking nukes of their own, they took the lead in declaring a different future. But even in a world of treaties, the threat still floats, quiet, hidden, and mobile. Submarine-based nukes loaded and ready now cruise beneath the surface of nearly every ocean. Capable of striking from anywhere, they serve as the backbone of second-strike deterrence. Even if a country's land-based arsenals are destroyed, the retaliation would still come. In this new reality, peace doesn't rest on paper. It rides beneath the waves. The bomb is no longer new, but the race to get it, that's far from over. Today, countries officially hold nuclear weapons, but at least one more is teetering on the edge, and several others are watching closely. Iran is the name that surfaces most often. Since the 2000s, global attention has fixated on its nuclear program. Despite its insistence that the goal is peaceful energy, leaked documents, uranium stockpiles, and stalled inspections have fueled suspicions for decades. Israel, already a nuclear power, has made it clear it won't allow Iran to build a bomb. From cyber attacks to assassinations of Iranian scientists, the shadow war is already well underway. But Iran isn't the only one preparing. Saudi Arabia's crown prince has openly declared, if Iran gets a bomb, we will too. The kingdom already has the funds, the technology, partnerships, and an active nuclear energy program. What it lacks may just be time. Japan, though publicly pacifist, has the capability to develop a nuclear arsenal faster than almost any nation on Earth. It possesses massive uranium reserves, advanced reactor technology, and a stockpile of plutonium. If geopolitics were to shift, it wouldn't be a matter of whether Japan could go nuclear, but whether it should. And then there are the nations in the shadows. Countries like Egypt, Syria, and Libya all pursued nuclear programs at various points in history, some even coming dangerously close. Israeli airstrikes and international sabotage ended those attempts, for now. Others, like Brazil and Argentina, once considered the bomb, but chose diplomacy instead. They remain capable, if not willing. But once a country crosses that line, it never fully steps back. And in a world where deterrence is defense and silence is strategy, one truth remains. The nuclear story isn't over. It's still being written, under oceans, in labs, and in war rooms around the globe. Thanks for watching. For clear, compelling history, subscribe to Long History Short, your shortcut to the whole story.